Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Path. I'm your host, Luke Hastings, at NarrowWayMan on Instagram. And it's been a while. It's been over 6 months, almost 7 months now. And that is because I've been busy with new things, client delivery and execution, business development, and this podcast was not contributing to any of those things, unfortunately. Not that it won't someday, but it wasn't, and so I had to lay it to rest because I am just one man right now. I'm probably going to keep it that way for as long as I can because I love what I do, and I am hesitant to trust others in helping me. Part of that is a toxic trait. Part of it is just because I really love what I do. Anyways, we're relaunching a podcast. Here we go. Season 2. Let's go. But this is going to look a little different. In Season 1 last year, 2023, we released on Mondays, pretty much exclusively. And now we're going to be doing YouTube every single time. So you're always going to be able to watch as well as listen if you'd like. We're not going to be doing just Mondays. And we're not going to necessarily be doing every week. We're just going to kind of do it when we want to do it. No clue why I'm saying we. Me, myself, and we're just going to do what we want. Also, we're not going to be, I am not going to be doing 30-minute like part 1, part 2s. I have grown to love certain podcasts over the past 6-7 months, and I don't mind if they're long. I just pick it back up later if I want to. So I'm going to give the same to you. You're not going to have to look for the full interview. It's always going to be published in one shot, published in full, right? So and that's pretty much it, man. That's what's up with The Path, and I'm looking forward to kicking off this episode today. I think is a beautiful one to kick off with. I'm talking to my friend Ray. Ray is the first name of the bearded man behind Graybeard Actual on Instagram. Guy has risen to prominence recently for good reason because the man is just on point breaking down the behaviors of promiscuous women, masculine frame. He really didn't intend to launch into purely relationship dynamics, but that's what the people wanted, and he delivers. He's knowledgeable in his Bible. He's well experienced in dealing with women, for better and for worse, as he alludes to in the episode. But he is not a man who cannot sympathize with the common man, right? He's not one of these guys who married a great submissive woman when he was young and just has had to deal with a quote-unquote normal marriage. He knows kind of the full spectrum of femininity, the good, the bad, the ugly, and he is Graybeard Actual for a reason. You know, he is in his early 50s. You know, a lot of people do not actually get much wiser with age, but this guy has collected some experience not in vain, and he really delivers on this podcast. We have some great conversations, and I know you'll appreciate it. It's kind of a bleak world out there, Ray. The dating game is kind of weak. It's kind of rough. It's kind of the Wild West. What do you think about like the average Christian man? He's trying to find his way out there in the dating world. What is the hope for him or lack thereof? What's kind of the realistic picture in your opinion?
I guess it depends on one's outlook. It's easier to talk to Christians. My background, a little bit, I didn't start the account as a Christian or religious, and I'm still only kind of dabbling in it a little bit, to be honest, but it's moving more that direction. But it is easier to talk to Christian men because they have hope outside of the here and now, the right now, than it is to somebody that basically has no faith, right? Somebody that has no faith, the best I can say is this is the fall of Western civilization. Mm-hmm. The fall of Rome. What are you going to do with that, right? It's not going to get better. So from the Christian perspective, we can still understand it's not going to get any better. And I'm speaking to a broad Christian crowd. I don't know what everybody's beliefs are, but
right.
From what the Bible says and what this looks like, this is the end. You know, whether that's another 20 or 30 years, there's nothing in Scripture that I can see that this is going to get any better, right? Mm-hmm. So as far as finding hope and all that, it's at an individual level of how are you going to spend the rest of these days? Let's go ahead and say it's another 30 years. Fair enough, right? End time prophecy is not really the topic. So let's just go ahead and
Sure.
assume there's decades to go. You're going to get married, have kids, and so on. And this would be true, honestly, of any time, but especially now. A guy has to find a woman that is sincerely spiritually minded, not just goes to church, not just grew up in church. Sometimes those are the worst. But it's, and of course, this goes for men too, any women that might be listening. But she has to be sincerely spiritually minded. And so, from my background, I was the wild kid. I didn't get into church until I was 26. And
Hmm.
just so I don't come across as misrepresenting myself, I backslid for a good 5 years, and I've only been going to church again for the last few months. Having said that, I got into church at 26 years old, and I found out it's not all church girls, of course, but I found out that it was a common thing among a lot of young women in the church. They were raised in church. They didn't really know anything else. They did, and young men go through a similar thing, but these young women, they didn't really have the nerve to step away from the church, but they didn't really want to be there, right? And
Right.
I really did hold out for that guy that would, like I did, come from outside of the church. He was a worldly guy. That was me. I was the bartender. I was the Marine. I did all that wild stuff. And a lot of girls were like, ooh, this is the guy. And in that reformed bad boy, in their minds, anyways, they got the best of both worlds, right? And
Hmm.
what I'm leading up to, though, is the girls that, the ones I met that thought like this, they probably have the severest case of FOMO, fear of missing out. In my experience, you'll never meet another woman that has a fear of missing out like a girl that's raised in a strict Christian home, a strict Christian church,
Yep.
really want to see what it's all about. And for whatever reason, they don't step out. You really have to be careful of that kind of thing. So, is there hope? Yeah. Is she spiritually minded? It's as simple as that. Is she spiritually minded? Is she sincere? Is she in it for the long haul? Does she convey biblical values in her own life?
The way I would say that, I think it's the same vein is she has to have at least gotten out there enough to know who she is and who she isn't, and kind of know the difference between how she was raised versus how she actually believes when push comes to shove. And if she's not really done that, then your confidence level, it's hard for that to be very high that she's not going to kind of derail.
Put some meat on the bones. What do you mean by get out there? Because I think that'll differ from one woman to the next. When you say get her out, I mean step away.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Get out there means separate herself enough emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically as well from her childhood upbringing and her kind of initial adolescent childhood values to see what sticks and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of girls, to your point, they have that FOMO, but it's suppressed because it's bad. And it's like, no, I'm supposed to stick to X, Y, and Z. And they have that suppressed FOMO that really is a part of who they are and really something they want to explore. But when they don't realize that, and they don't realize that they don't want to stick to all the rules that they've grown up with, they can keep that suppressed and then enter into relationships and then it just comes out and surprises everybody.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that to the degree that I'm thinking of it now. I think that's going to be different. If I sat and made a list, we could probably come up with 5 or 6 different types of female personalities.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking out loud here, so don't hold me.
sure.
But what you just described, I think for some girls, stepping out means what? If it means going out and giving herself away and partying, I would say no to that. But
Sure.
let's say she goes off to university for a little bit, or just maybe takes a job. I don't know. I could come up with several different scenarios where
Yeah,
basically she's living her own life a little bit, whether it's through a career, a job, school, whatever it is, but she needs to see something outside of the church. And when I think of different types of personalities, I've known, and this goes for men too, obviously, but I've known some girls that were very naturally pious. Now, pious is a fancy word for a lot of people, but piety is neutral. It's not good or bad. Piety is just a person's shorthand definition, is just a person's predilection to being religious, right?
Sure.
So piety can go negative or positive, but a young lady in church that is naturally pious and say she comes from a solid family and everything, I think that girl can go right into marriage with a godly man and boom, no phone, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you're going to have a girl that's naturally pious, and in the other end of the spectrum, a girl that she just isn't going to work. I mean, the FOMO's just going to explode, right? And so
Yeah.
between those two ends of the spectrum, that's where you're going to have these different levels of, has she gone to university or does she have a decent job? Has she been exposed enough to the world without necessarily acting like the world
Right.
to have a mindset of her own and to know that this is where she wants to be at?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. No, I'm right there with you. And I think what I was kind of alluding to is a girl who was maybe raised in that conservative Christian home, and she has been raised so precisely, perhaps legalistically, strictly, that she doesn't even realize that she's not pious. She just thinks she is because
Yeah.
she's suppressed that side of herself, right? And from the outside looking in, it's kind of hard to know who's who,
Yes. Absolutely.
especially when they're young. And to your point, they haven't got out in the world, not necessarily to partake, but at least to truly see it, to truly have that chance, right? To truly have it in their hand and then not lay hold of it. That's the test that they've never had to endure, so they don't really know, right? Like it's like the incel community, right? A lot of guys that come from my background as well, that grew up in the church, they like to think they're abstaining from sex, but really sex is abstaining from them.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like, no, you're not virtuous, dude. Like, you couldn't get laid if you wanted to. So it's like, it's not a real signal of virtue for you. In the same way, some of these girls that have grown up in the church, getting married young, one of the risks is she hasn't really had to abstain from something she's never had a chance to take up or abstain from either way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just make the distinction between if a girl's halfway decent looking and 20 years old in church or not, she's getting attention,
No,
Whereas,
that's a great point. Yeah.
and this, if I say this wrong, I don't want to be in the wrong context because I would never fault a brother for living the life that he's led. But I thought about that a lot when I was more solidly in church, and a little bit of my background, like I said, I was the bartender, wild guy, all that. I got into
Mm-hmm.
26. It was never full time, but was in the ministry from mid 30s up until mid 40s. I always did really well with women. I'm not because I knew what I was doing. I just hit the genetic lottery, and girls started paying attention to me at a young age. And then that's kind of a side note of women and all that. But I learned as I went, and I'll be perfectly honest. I had a lot of women offered to me, right? And when I was in church and dealing with it, what I'm getting at is when I was in the ministry and dealing with people at different levels and things that they were struggling with, and contemplating what is the temptation to you, what's causing the barriers in your life, right? What are the obstacles? And I had guys like you're saying, like, oh, I'm 40 years old and I've never done. Yeah, you never had that option, bro. And it really made me stop and think about, and this is kind of parallel to what we're talking about, is how much has this person had to endure as far as temptation goes,
Right.
right? What do you have really offered to you? And so the short version of all that is a lot of the guys that I had to deal with, when they had bad marriages later and they had relationship problems later, they didn't have anything to compare it to, right? They just had nothing to compare it to. And I thought,
Great point.
if I could put this guy, the one I'm actually thinking of a specific guy from years ago, if I put him in my shoes, especially at 23, behind the bar, and women just, you wouldn't be talking so virtuously. It's just right there. But more to the point of where I was going to tie that back into what's been like this girl's experience. Has she been on a job? She takes a job at a big office. She's 23, let's say, right? And she's getting hit on by attractive men that are a couple years older, maybe, and have a good job and whatever. And what do you see? And what I saw coming to church at 26, and this is probably true anywhere, the new guy, right? Because any church social group is kind of an insular, smaller group, right? And so just being the new guy, period, but being that kind of reformed bad boy thing, I got a lot of attention. And I was coming out of the world and I knew something about how women acted.
Yep.
And picked up on, and there's a thing for this for guys too, what I picked up on being new in an apostolic church, which is pretty strict. The girls wanted to kind of show me how worldly they were. Not all of them, the worldly girls wanted to. So when nobody else was listening, and I'm saying this as an instruction manual kind of thing, when nobody else was listening, some of these girls would be a little more risque, a little more flirty, right? And the guys too, that some of the guys that really weren't into church, they were just kind of there. They're the ones that made the dirty jokes that they wouldn't tell anybody else because they thought, I'm the worldly guy, I'll think they're cool. And I'm like, no, I don't think you're cool. And I remember we went to, I wasn't even fully into church yet. I lived in Arizona, and we were in Tempe. If anybody knows Tempe, I went to Arizona State. Tempe is just wild, Mill Avenue. It's crazy. And we're at this Applebee's, and I have girls, church girls on both sides of me and sitting across from me. And the one on my left has her hand solidly on my thigh the entire time. The one on my right keeps touching my thigh, but then pulls her hand back. And the one across from me keeps telling me stories, basically telling me how worldly she is. And I remember thinking, ladies, if this is what I wanted, I would be down the street, because just 2 weeks earlier I'm bartending down the street. This is not what I want, right? So more to the point of, what young men or any men can look for in a relationship, in a Christian relationship. What is she exposing to you? What is she showing to you?
Yeah.
Right? Is she going to show you, hey, look, I'm sexy too? Because I saw that a lot, right? And so I'm looking around for what girl's not trying to impress me with how sexy she is, right?
Right. It's not attractive for the godly man to see a girl trying to prove that she has an edge.
Yes.
That's not what we're looking for.
That's not even what worldly men are looking for, right?
Facts, yeah. Well, unless they're just trying to hit it and quit it, like a one-night stand type thing. But yeah, if any man is looking for a long-term queen type of partner, yeah, we're not trying to see, oh, she has an edge, how fun.
Yeah. Well, one night, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about first choice. That's a hashtag you're always using. I think I've seen a shirt that you've wear that says first choice. So, and it kind of ties into the girls will make rules for betas, break them for alphas, or something along those lines. There's different ways of saying that. I'm thinking with these girls that are trying to show you that side of themselves to kind of sort of win you over, that's a signal that they're willing to break rules.
Yes.
Right? And they will break rules for their first choice. Right? So all these things kind of tie together. Talk to us about first choice as, and disclaimer, I'm not saying that we should try to get girls to break rules. I'm just saying they will. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what they'll do. And even down to the stupid, 30, 50 item lists of what they want in a husband, all that goes out the door whenever they encounter an alpha in whatever capacity he's in, and he just does it for them. Screw the list. They're done. They're done with the list. That's representative of the rules that they will break, right? So talk to us about first choice. And if you want to comment on my ramble, you can as well. But
well, first off, let's just talk about human nature, right? Apart from Christian or church or faith or anything else, human nature, and I know people get tired of the word, but it is hypergamy. Hypergamy is a real thing.
Yep.
Not a bad thing or a good thing. Hypergamy is simply a woman's survival instinct to have the best mate possible. Simple.
Sure.
And if you look at it in very clinical terms, it can look opportunistic. And technically it is. What makes it opportunistic in a bad way or a neutral way or a good way is, does this woman have a moral compass? So leave Christianity and faith aside for a second. A woman without a moral compass, she's always going to be affected by hypergamy, and the grass is always greener, right? And that would have been true 100 years ago if she had no moral compass, right? Now you throw in everything, let's just say from 1970, just make it a nice clean break. Everything from 1970 on is sexual liberation, feminism, everything, right? So the average woman, and this isn't to knock on women, they're a product of the society they're in, right? So if the average woman starts having sex in high school, has a couple relationships, goes to college, et cetera, et cetera. By the time she feels like she's ready to marry in her mid to late 20s, let's say, she's had what, 15, 20 guys? That's not an exaggeration. I've lived that, right? It's so, apart from all the other psychological ramifications that go along with promiscuity, she's been to this point of genuine desire, first choice, hypergamy, all these things. There's a kind of an amalgamation of men in her mind, right? She went and had some really wild sex with guys that she knew this is not a thing that's ever going to work out. And yes, this is part of human nature. That's kind of appealing to a lot of women, even good women, right? So she scratched that itch. She had some really wild stuff that it was taboo. And again, you can look up Psychology Today, whatever. Taboo is a thing, separate issue. We don't have time for that. And then she had some good guys, and then she had some guys with status, and then she had some whatever. She has this collection of guys, and the guy that's in her mind now he doesn't really exist, right? You can never give her sex in that wild, crazy way because she knows your last name. It's not taboo. You didn't just meet her. You can never be the taboo guy.
It's that proverb that says, stolen bread eaten in secret is sweeter. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Because she's already got your number, it's just not the same.
You can't be, that's perfect. That is absolutely perfect. You can't be her stolen bread. By the very fact that you're trying to be a boyfriend, you can never be stolen bread, right? And then again, I can make 10 different examples that are versions of stolen bread, right? And so if you're going to be a woman's first choice, genuine desire, and I'm trying to kind of keep that separate from faith and Christianity.
I hear you.
But to try to lay that down, that's why it's important. Can a woman have a body count of 10 or whatever, and you still be her first choice? Yes. And it gets into something that I call, just my own phrase I come up with, just situational awareness. Are you Jack from the Titanic, or are you Jack from the counting? And I've been every that I can think of, and I talked about this recently as well, I'm going to do more on it, that there's the dangers in being good boyfriend material. So there's kind of this misconception, or misperceptions rather, that if you're not her first choice, you're some kind of simp nice guy. Oh no. And I said this, I think just last week, and it'll sound braggadocio at first, but it's not. I've never had a girl break up with me. Never. And maybe in early high school, I just can't think of it. I can't remember, but I've never had a girl break up with me. But I'm not stupid and I'm not delusional. I was not the first choice of most of those girls that I went out with. So why would they continue to date me if I wasn't their first choice? Well, because I'm not a simp. I'm not a whatever beta, I'm good boyfriend material.
Sure.
And so this amalgamation of women I'm talking about that I've dated, teens, they would lock down a boyfriend. Well, they're not going to let that go. It gets into hypergamy and there's value and whatever else. But I'm getting too far astray there. To the point is she doesn't have to be a virgin for you to be her first choice, but you have to recognize the situational aspect of it. Again, are you Jack from accounting? Are you Jack from the Titanic? And every girl that's ever really super just fallen for me, it's come out of a situation where, I don't want to start telling stories, but where I was kind of the knight in shining armor for her. There's a girl, I stepped in and her ex-fiance was there with his new girlfriend and it got ugly and I stepped in and the new girlfriend wanted the ex-fiance to beat me up and I just said, and I knew the guy, I said, you can't do that. I said, you need to go away before I embarrass you. And I said that in front of like 50 people. And he tucked his tail and walked away. And the girl whose defense I was coming to, she was like, oh, right? So I've got about 5 stories like that. Recognize when you are in a situation where you can be Jack on the Titanic, right? And also recognize when you're just good boyfriend material and you're Jack from accounting. And
Right.
she can't help but mention the guy that saved her, like the story I'm kind of alluding to. Oh, yeah, there was this one guy, a couple years ago, but he stepped in, and boy, if she's really hung up on a guy like that, she can't help but to talk about it.
Right.
Right? And she will. So tying that into church, though, that gets into body count, promiscuity, all these different things that I talk about so much. And I don't know how many people that listen to your podcast that also know my content. If you know my content, I promise I never set out to talk about promiscuity as much as I do. But I tell you what, it's the one thing I get so many guys talking to me about every week. And I've made a cajillion videos on this, and I still get guys asking me the same question. So, okay, here we go. To the point, and we can tie some proverbs into this as well. It emasculates a man to be with a promiscuous woman. All right, and I'll get into the promiscuous woman that finds God. That's a separate issue, but it emasculates. That's why Proverbs 5 and 7 talk about the strange woman robs that man's strength. Her bed leads to hell. Why? Because by definition, if she's a promiscuous woman, you can never be the man, tying this into genuine desire, right? You can never be the man. You can only be one of many men. So the guy that gets with the promiscuous woman thinks he's accomplishing something. He thinks, oh, hit it and quit it, man. I'm doing this. Yeah, you and 73 other guys. You're like, really? That's giving. And if you read Proverbs, and I know you have, but read Proverbs 5 and 7 in its completion, it talks about wasting your life, giving your strength not just to women, but that whole lifestyle, right? And so getting that back to genuine desire, though, from a Christian perspective, is don't get in that line, right? Don't get in that line.
Yeah.
Be choosy. If you're how old are you?
31.
31. If you're, let's just say, 30 and under, the women that you're most likely going to be dealing with, a guy that's 30 and younger, he's going to come across this less often than an older man will. But the woman that went out and lived a certain way, promiscuous, whatever, for 20 years and then comes to church, that's the more common scenario. Now, a guy your age or a little bit younger, he is going to come across the girl that, she had a party phase and she gets into church at 23. That does happen, but not as much as the 43-year-old. So I'm kind of trying to cover two age brackets here.
Yeah.
I get a lot of pushback from Christian followers asking me, if she's been promiscuous, if she's had that party lifestyle and she comes to God, is that still feasible? Right? It's not optimal, right? It's not optimal. Because you go back into the same thing before. Even if she's sincere and genuine in repentance and trying to turn her life around, I'm going to do some content on this because it comes up every day, every time I do something like this. Salvation. It sounds like I'm going astray here, but I have to set the groundwork here.
I'm with you.
Salvation doesn't make us robots. You're still the same person. The Holy Ghost. I'm old school. I say Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost gives a person peace in the moment, and it gives us strength to overcome our flesh. That's to the glory of God. If God wiped our minds out, all the emotional, psychological impact of that previous sinful life, if God just wiped the hard drive clean, there's no glory to God in that, right? The glory to God is that I've repented, I'm living a Holy Ghost-filled life, I'm choosing daily to put my eyes on God, to develop a relationship with God, and in turn the Holy Ghost gives me strength over this flesh. But the hard drive's not wiped clean, right? And it's not that I'm struggling or, a promiscuous woman coming to God. It's not that she struggles every day with the sins that she committed 10 years ago, but her flesh is still her flesh. I made a post on this just today about the plasticity of personality, and people just lose their minds over it, right? But it is to the glory of God that we overcome every day the things that we used to do, this flesh, right? So to the genuine desire question, though, if she had 23 or 43, if she's had a promiscuous past, it's not optimal, but let's just say you met her, you already developed a relationship before you realize what kind of past she had, whatever it is. You need to look for, as with any woman, does she have a sincere spiritual mindset? Number one. Number two is she still hanging on to that lifestyle, or not lifestyle? Is she still hanging on to the past? Yes, men do this too. I'm not knocking women. They come into church, and I've seen plenty of men to do. I'll use men as an example. They've been in church 5 or 10 years, and they still can't help but tell the glory stories, their glory days from back before they got in church, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a testimony that they're a little bit too excited about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And people start talking about, sorry, pouring my coffee here.
you're good.
People start talking about, I've seen people give some very sincere testimonies, and then somebody else, men or women, they'll chime in, oh yeah, and like you're bragging now. You're not. There's no
We're trying
shame,
to one up the other guy. Yeah.
and they're going to kind of let it slide in all the girls they had, or all the partying they did, or all the fun they had, right? But to kind of tie a knot into that, as far as genuine desire goes, all women are hypergamous. The most pious woman out there is hypergamous, but she's pious. Let's go ahead and assume that it's a positive piety, in that she's not legalistic, not self-righteous, none of that. But she's living a life with a sincerely spiritual mindset, right? She's still hypergamous, guys. She still wants the best that she can do. And on the other end of the spectrum is the reformed bad girl, right? She still has to have the same number one criteria. Is she sincerely spiritually minded, right? Fair enough. Then everything in between that, or after that, that spiritual mindset is she genuinely interested in you? Whether it's the pious girl, let's say it's the super pious girl and you know she's a virgin. You're convinced 100%. You're 31, let's say she's 25, and preacher's daughter. She's dated one guy before. You know what? For whatever reason, it didn't work out, and she didn't have sex with him. But you know what? That guy has status. That guy was 6'4" and too good looking, and so on and so on. You're still in his shadow, or possibly in his shadow, right?
Right, right.
So be considered. And then, like I said, the other end of the spectrum is the reformed promiscuous girl. And are you Jack on the Titanic or Jack from accounting? So they always consider, but
It's good. That's good. Yeah. So it's from what I'm gathering, it's learning to assess, number one, is she truly either presently living a life of holiness or presently reformed from her past life? That's kind of number one. And then number two, in either scenario, is are we Jack from the Titanic or Jack from accounting? And we have to figure out that one. Sounds like the main point you gave, and I'll let you add some others if you'd like, but it sounds like the main point you gave was kind of by listening, letting her reveal through some conversation, several dates over a few weeks or a couple months, like, oh, she keeps bringing up this.
yes. Or, and it could be, let's leave it to the clean side, right? The super pious girl that's only had one boyfriend and so on and so on. So you think, oh, she's great. She's awesome. Yeah, but her ex, her ex that went on to, he's a big name evangelist now, and everybody knows his name. She can't help but to tell you, oh, yeah, Derek, whatever, right? He's preaching a big revival over in Texas now. There's like 3,000 people there. Wow. You should go, why is that even on your radar? Why do you even know that, right? So pay attention to the little stories, and they reveal themselves every time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We had a question come through chat. It said, how do you stay Jack from the Titanic for your whole marriage? And I think that's a fair question. I think the vow is there for a reason. I'll let you speak to this too, Ray, but the vow is there for a reason because, in marriage, we see the other person and they see us at our worst. And sometimes we do look more like Jack from accounting at times. Like we all have those days and moments and weeks sometimes. So the vow is there for a reason. If we could always be Jack from the Titanic, we probably wouldn't need a vow, but the vow's there. At the same time, we don't want to tempt the angels. So many guys let themselves go after marriage, and this is almost another topic. But what I hate in and hate's a strong word, but I'm going to use it because I mean it. What I hate in the Christian manosphere that you, Ray, and a few others are exempt from, but only a few. Most of us out here, we try to make marriage like the be all end all and the family the be all end all. And if you do that and your motivation for being Jack from the Titanic is to get married and have a family, then once you do, your motivation's going to go away. And so what I tell my guys that I work with is like, you've got to be Jack from the Titanic because you want to be him, not because you're trying to get a girl. You have to be moving that direction on your own with or without a woman, right? And if that's the true mindset you're coming from, then that should in theory continue after marriage, right?
Yep.
But you speak to that as well.
The idea of masculine frame is complicated because there's no Webster's definition for it, right? And I've heard some really crazy. Okay, let me back up a little bit. I'm red pill, and I know everybody says, "Oh, red pill's degenerate." I'm red pill because red pill is it is just a praxeology. It really is. And when people come against, and I don't hold anything against people that criticize red pill because not everybody understands. But my example is if somebody looks at Westboro Baptist Church, I don't know if you know who they are, but they're the crazy, they're nuts. If somebody looked at Westboro Baptist and say, see that? I don't like Christians. Hold on, right? So to the point, I will speak in terms of masculine frame and different things along those lines because I'm adhering to what I see as a kind of just a blueprint, a basic, this is life, this is reality, this is masculine nature, this is female nature, right? And so having said that, masculine frame is Jack on the Titanic in the sense that, it's my analogy. Jack on the Titanic really comes down to how'd you meet. That's situational. Because Jack from the county is still the same guy, right? So kind of put that aside, though, the situational aspect of that. What makes Jack from the Titanic, what gives him that masculine frame, that aura, is the masculine frame itself, right? Yep. And so getting into human nature, masculine nature, feminine nature, how do you maintain that? I would say if starting from square one, you are in that masculine frame, you are the guy that she wants to get with. There is genuine desire. She shows a certain amount of infatuation. You're not blowing up her phone. You're not begging for her approval. You're not putting her on a pedestal just to try to get her attention, right? She falls in love with that guy. That's the hypergamy aspect. She falls in love with that guy. Now, how do you stay that guy? You don't become her buddy. And this is what people hate to hear. You are not her friend in a platonic sense. If you want, and I'm not trying to be crude here, but if you want to dry a woman up faster than a hot Arizona sidewalk, you be platonic with her. It just doesn't work. A woman, even a pious Christian woman that initially had genuine desire for a man, if he allows that relationship to become platonic, it just doesn't work. So how do you maintain that? And this is where some of the red pill guys talk about dread game and all this. And I have some content I'm going to make in the near future on the fallacy of thinking of anything as a game, but that's neither here nor there. But to the point, things like this only seem like a game when a man doesn't have sufficient understanding or sufficient social skill to already be doing this thing.
Exactly.
So if I tell a guy, don't blow her phone up, you just went out with her yesterday, you've known her for 3 days, don't text her 10 times tomorrow.
Right.
I should be myself. I should, be myself. No, stop, right? Social skills is just understanding how you're going to come off to somebody. So fast forward that to next level kind of social skills is masculine frame is simply, are you a strong man? I don't know how much of my content you've watched, but vulnerability is a topic that I get onto pretty regularly. Vulnerability is a type of weakness. Doesn't mean a man can't cry. A man can cry, but those tears don't flow easily, right? There is a stoic command of emotions. I've had tragedy in my own life in the last year. I promise you I cried. But it wasn't just effusive, uncontrollable sorrow. It wasn't. It wasn't because I was struggling to suppress those feelings. I promise you, I didn't feel like it half the time. I had all these people calling me to offer condolences, and I thought, I just don't want to talk right now. And it wasn't because I was a blubbering mess. I just didn't feel like talking. To the point of masculine frame, there's going to be, well, okay, I like doing this. You may have heard about it. The American Psychological Association in 2019 issued that year's guidelines in which they basically said masculinity is a problem and needs to be treated as such.
Yep.
So my favorite, I've not heard anybody else do this either, so I get a kick out of this. So in order to call something a disorder, in order to call it a problem, they have to define it. Well, what they define? Because their whole purpose is to try to make masculinity subjective. Well, if you're going to define your disorder, you have to put objective parameters on the thing that you're saying is a disorder. And so what they do is they turn around and give a pretty good definition of objective masculinity, right? He's aggressive. They would say violent, but not necessarily. He's aggressive. He has to, well, Jordan Peterson famously says, right, about being the
dragon. Yeah.
So you have to have some aggression. You have to be assertive. You have to be competitive. The APA even uses the word stoic, right? You have to have a stoic command of your emotions. And so the APA goes down this list. As they're trying to say masculinity is subjective, they have to give us an objective list of descriptors in order to say what their disorder is. Well, the disorder is objective masculinity. And if you're going to be Jack from the Titanic 20 years into your marriage, it's because you maintained your masculine frame. You didn't come home from a bad day at work and complain to your wife about how mean your boss is, because that makes you look like, well, the wrong word came to mind, but it doesn't make you look like a man. How about that? Right? And there's all these little tiny things that go into a relationship, especially long term, because like you said, there's the vow. The vow will get a spiritually minded woman through, I won't call it bad days. The vow will get a spiritually minded woman past the times of boredom. And maybe that's another topic for another time, but women, a lot of young men, church or not, don't understand that women, they have a menstrual cycle. That day one, she's a different person. She's a different person on day one than she is at day 15 versus day 30. She just is a different person. You have to come to grips with that. Now expand that out over her lifetime, right? Over a month, over a year, over 5 years. You're not always dealing with the same person, right? And so as a man in a role of leadership in the relationship, a man needs to understand where she's at. And I don't mean every day like you have to keep notes in a spreadsheet. Don't be a nerd. Don't be weird. But you have to understand where she's at. And is she a little more sensitive? Is she a little more standoffish? Whatever that is. And as you as a man, whether you come home from work and complain about your boss or whatever it is you're doing, you're adjusting yourself to how you communicate with her. And that helps you maintain a close intimacy because you're not a tyrant, but also it's not quite platonic. You're not buddies. She still wants to take your clothes off.
Right.
Right. And that is a long-winded answer to saying masculine frame is the key to being Jack on the Titanic. Because that menstrual cycle example, she's going to get bored sometimes, guys. She just is. You as a man, if people watching this take away nothing else, especially if you're younger, remember this: a woman is going to get bored. She's going to get bored. Don't take it personal, right? And you as a man, this is the most frustrating thing in the world. You're going to do everything right. You're in church, maybe you're even in the ministry. You're doing outreach. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And a woman, even a pious Christian woman, needs a little drama in her head sometimes, right? And here you are, a good Christian guy, doing what you're supposed to be doing. You open the door, you buy her flowers, you protect and provide everything, and she's just going to hit a certain point in her hormonal cycle. She gets bored. Which, side note, that's why being spiritually minded and having a strong moral compass is important. Because the woman that's not spiritually minded, when she's bored, bad things happen, okay?
Yeah.
So to the point of men just understanding this, you're going to hit a point in marriage that you've done everything right, and she still seems to take it for granted. And that's where masculine frame and even dread game, which I'm not really getting into, but the red pill guys would call dread game because it's kind of where you have to teach a guy to kind of fake masculine frame, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it's needed, but it is fake.
Yeah.
I had a woman in my comments actually ask me about this, and I hadn't thought about it because she's coming from a feminine point of view. But she asked a good question, and somebody else, as she was having a conversation, comments with another guy, and they're talking. You guys know what a neg hit is? It's a red pill thing. Do this little negative insult or whatever.
It's a negative tease, basically.
Yeah. And so she asked me some questions, and I hadn't really thought about it in ways to try to explain it to a woman. But what I came up with is a neg hit is a fake version of what the confident man does when he's kind of, like you said, a tease. So if I'm on a date with a girl and she's really into me and I'm confident and I'm into her, I can crack jokes about whatever. And I do this all the time, I would say, I'm at the dinner and the waitress comes up and says something, and I'll crack a joke at nothing mean or cruel, but I'll crack a joke at the girl's expense, and it's never backfired. She laughs. She thinks it's cute, right? That's real confidence. The neg hit is fake confidence. That's why I go sideways half the time, because it's not natural for the guy. So he'll call her fat or something. And he didn't mean to call her fat, but he's too socially inept to get it. And I'm not making socially inept guys, but
no, 100%. That's one of my main theses or thesis in my content and teaching is like the pickup artists, the pickup lines, the game, the hacks, the tricks, the mind stuff. That's for guys, who don't have confidence. What guys are leaning on those tips and tricks and dread game and all these things because they're hoping that will give them confidence, but that's what they really need. And unfortunately, women are very intuitive and they can pick up on the real ones pretty quick. And if she can't, she's probably a bit too shallow for you. So to speak on not having a platonic relationship with your wife or with a woman in general, I think the cheat code for that, and guys who follow me will know this, but the cheat code for that is to have male friendships that you can be your real self with male friends. You made a funny reel the other day about being yourself. You made an extreme example of like, oh, do you want to fart on a date?
Yeah.
Like, that's being yourself, right? Hey, you can do that with the guys when you're having a beer with the guys. You can do that. And everybody's going to laugh and it's going to be funny. And somebody else is going to try to fart louder and it's fine. And nobody cares, depending on what friend group you're with, I guess. But that's a guy thing, right? Yeah, you don't do that. You don't do that with your wife.
Of a fart.
What's that?
That men never outgrow the humor of a good fart.
I think you're right. Yeah. And then when they get like really old, it's just anywhere they go, right? But yeah, it's the same concept. It's like the vulnerability, right? You can go complain to one of your buddies about how much of a jerk your boss is, and he'll probably complain back to you about his life, and you guys can have a good complain session, but your wife doesn't need to bear that burden, because then if it's not the friend instinct, it's something worse, which is the mother instinct, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're in big trouble either way there. Jack from accounting maybe complains to her, but Jack from the Titanic doesn't.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the male friendships thing, dude. Total cheat code. And I think that's the absence of that in modern society is leading to too much of that friend zoning. Would
the majority of your guys, are they around your age? Are they younger? Are they older?
Yeah, it's about a 10-year give or take. So anywhere from 22 to 45 approximately.
I'm just curious who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
I think what's really lost I'm 53. I think what's really lost on guys my age and younger, even guys a little bit older than me, is kind of a mindset. I was thinking about this today. I don't think I've made content on it. I'm not necessarily a fake it till you make it kind of guy. And I'm definitely not one of these people that talks about manifesting things, whatever. But it does matter how you view yourself, men or women, right? If I view myself as successful or going to college or being a businessman or whatever it is, and I find myself flipping burgers, I'm going to go, how'd this happen, right? Or vice versa. Maybe let's say a guy that really sees himself as a blue collar mechanic, a kind of guy that just gets things done and drives a pickup. I drive a pickup truck, but drives a pickup. If he finds himself working a desk job, he's going to think, well, how did I get here? I'd rather be out pouring concrete. And I've lived both those lives, so nothing wrong with either one of those. But how do you view yourself? And so, what's really lost in the modern generations, mine included, is do men really see themselves as being tough? And I know, if somebody wants to come back at me like a feminist type and say, "Oh, you're a caveman," or "Oh, you're posing," no, there's really something to a man wanting to be tough. And I, as a kid, wanted to be a Marine. And my dad was a super nice guy. He was a cop, but he was masculine, but he wasn't overtly gruff or anything. And I remember watching John Wayne movies with my dad as a little kid, and my dad explaining the Marine Corps to me because of this movie. And I thought, I'm going to be a Marine. And my dad's like, oh, no, they're the hardest. Why would you want to do that? And I go, yeah, that's what I want to do, the hardest thing, right?
Yeah.
And all my life, I wanted to be tough. I wanted to do tough things. If you told me at 15 or at 25 or whatever, if you gave me a choice of 3 paths, I'm typically going to take the harder one, right? So somewhere in there, in all this, I'm trying to be broad, not be too specific here, but I think men need to have a desire to want to do the hard thing. Well, let's talk about church, right? Oh, here's a Bible study program or whatever. I'm making stuff up. Do you want the easy Cliff Notes version so you can move on to the next level, or do you want the big 3-volume hardbound set? Well, I'm going to go with the 3-volume hardbound set because if I'm going to do this, I want to go dive in and really do this thing.
Right.
To kind of try to encompass everything we're getting into. It's like you got to want to do the hard thing, even on women, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend in Vancouver, and we talk a lot. We leave each other voicemails. It's kind of like modern day writing a letter or something. And he's about my age, and we both have a similar history. And I'm not condoning all the sleeping around and everything, but I slept around quite a bit before I got into church.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, my buddy, has had a couple really bad marriages. And we were talking about why these things kind of backfired on us some. And my takeaway is that by sleeping around as much as I did before I got into church, I didn't learn how to pick good women going forward. And so what happens to men is if you learn to respond to the girl that makes herself available, well, you're going to get the available girl. Think about that.
Surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. And so doing the hard thing is sometimes don't be thirsty. And let's say you're a good Christian boy, you're 25 years old, and you don't think you're thirsty, right? But there's X amount of church girls to choose from, or at least to pursue or show interest in, right? The hard thing often is, I want that girl there. And I'm not proposing chasing in the beta kind of put it on a pedestal thing, but sometimes the hard thing is having standards that says she's 40 pounds overweight. I'm not overweight. I think she's dated 4 or 5 guys in this church alone. I don't want that. God bless her. She'll find a good life, but not with me, right? And you can go on down this list that even applies to good, clean Christian young people, right? Do the hard thing. Don't take just what's available. Don't lower your standards. Good enough, right? Do the hard thing. Be tough. Be tough in choosing who you're going to allow into your life.
Yep. Absolutely. How do you summarize what biblical masculinity is?
I've been doing content on this lately. The Bible does not, and correct anybody, chime in and correct me if I'm missing something.
I'm going to agree with you. I saw your reel.
Yeah, I know my Bible pretty well. The Bible does not address masculinity itself directly. The only thing I can think of, masculinity, we're not talking about godly traits where Paul says a man will be righteous, faithful. No. masculinity. The only thing I can come up with, and I posted on it recently, is, and I've actually already got my notes. I'm going to be posting on it again tomorrow. 1 Corinthians 6 and 9. The word effeminate is used. Word of caution. This is right out of the notes that I'm going to post tomorrow. Word of caution. All of your modern translations takes the word effeminate out.
Yep. I nerded out on that verse because you already posted a reel with that verse, and I dug into it, and I actually have a list here. There's, the more modern translations, right? Like ESV takes it out. If you want to find that word effeminate, you have to go to NKJV or KJV,
Yep.
some of the older ones, right? But it's a word that I think our culture doesn't like the interpretation.
Yep.
And it's only used a couple times in scripture. The only other times it's used is when
Soft, a fine linen cloth.
That's right. Yeah, he's done his homework, ladies and gentlemen. So a fellow man of culture here, he looked up the Greek. So it's a man. The word effeminate is also translated in Matthew and in Luke, referring to John the Baptist when they're asking, well, what were you expecting to see? A man dressed in soft, fine linens. That word, soft, fine linens, is the same word there is translated effeminate or soft, right? The idea is there's a softness, there's kind of a delicate tenderness, a softness, right? And man, I'm completely cutting you off. I'm sorry, but the point that Ray went into, the reel is already out before we even recorded this. He's going to make another piece of content later, but it's a list of people who will not inherit the kingdom of God. It's a list of people who are not making it into the kingdom, and it's a list that includes here it is. I have it pulled up on my my Greek nerdy thing. I use Blue Letter Bible, which is really good. And the King James says, "Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived. Neither fornicators," here's a list, "neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor the homosexuals, abusers of themselves with mankind," is how the King James says it. But other translations you call that one sodomites or homosexuals,
Abusers.
abusers of themselves with mankind. Yep. But that Greek word for effeminate, malakos, is only used a couple other times in the New Testament. And with that John the Baptist thing, what were you expecting to see? Some softy, right? So our culture hates that.
Let me throw some detail into that. So
please go ahead.
There's a lot of soft men out there. I know some very godly men that are on their way to heaven, man. Are they super tough and ultra masculine? Nope. Fair enough. But it's a kind of a sliding scale, number one. So I'm being fair. And when we think of idolaters and adulterers, we think of somebody that's actually out cheating or somebody bowing down to an idol, right? But keep in mind that God's grace is forever, right? It's everlasting. His mercy is everlasting. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the psalm. God gives us grace in this. So are we only talking about people that have committed an act of adultery or worshiping an actual idol? No. So when you're at church this Sunday and you notice that she's modest and whatever, and she's wearing modest whatever, but she's hot, and you notice her and you have a thought, and she's married, or you're married, or whatever, is God going to strike you down? No, he's not. All right? God's merciful. But that's a spirit of adultery. Jesus talks about that. You can look on the woman, right? Which freaked everybody out in the day because they were legalists. But you see where I'm going with this. Do you have to bow down to an idol to be an idolater? Well, no. Is your hobby? How much time do you spend on fantasy football versus how much do you know the Bible, right? And if you know fantasy football a whole lot more than you know the Bible, you're an idolater. Okay? And I'm not saying that's some kind of legalistic, hard-handed, heavy-handed way.
That's an example, yeah. You're prioritizing one thing clearly above the other.
And so when God is looking at us, are we soft or not? It doesn't mean you have to be perfectly John Wayne masculine, right? But just as you looked at Sister so-and-so, and noticed whatever, or you're dealing with your priorities in life, God's giving you some grace here. We're not saying everybody has to go out and bench press a car
Exactly.
John Wayne incarnate. That's not what we're saying. But as a general rule of thumb, and getting back to the original thing of where does the Bible really talk about masculinity? That's the only thing I can think of where it's very directly boom. And there's other more indirect implications.
Yes.
Also in Corinthians, Paul, I must say, chapter 13, I think he made a meme on it, but when Paul says, quit yourself like men, act like men, right? Be strong. That's a more
Hmm.
indirect. It doesn't describe what that really looks like or what that means. So I can think of several indirect implications where it said be a man or be strong without really explaining any of that. But I'm glad you guys asked that, because that's something I've been doing notes on recently, is coming up with examples of masculinity. Look at King David,
Yep.
my favorite topic overall in the Bible. Uh,
Hmm.
he was lauded to be a man of war, and we don't know his exact age, but I go with a little bit older than what some people do. But when he was invited into King Saul's court, he was 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. No, I would say no younger than 15. And I've done the math, can't prove it, but let's just say no younger than 15. But even as a teenager, he was lauded as a man of war. He had killed the lion. He had killed the bear, right? He would soon kill Goliath. That pretty masculine to me, a man of war, right?
Hmm.
And then you could look at different exploits he did. Something else I was looking at was Aaron, the brother of Moses, the high priest. His two oldest sons were consumed by fire from God for them offering up a strange fire, right? And Moses looked Aaron square in the face, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but he looked Aaron square. I got goosebumps. He looked at Aaron square in the face and said, "Suck it up, don't cry." All of Israel's watching. Go look it up. It's Leviticus 10. Not right now, later. Go look it up, right? And Moses tells Aaron, Leviticus 10, you suck it up. All of Israel's watching. God did that. If you make a mess of yourself and cry and everything, you are lamenting the actions of God. And he said, suck it up. And it said, Aaron, the Bible says, Aaron's like, all right, just lost my two boys. Suck it up. And he did, right? And
Powerful.
that's not easy, right?
No.
I'm making a list. I don't know how that will fit into content or not, but I am making a list of masculine examples, since the Bible doesn't really get into it directly, but yet we have all these. Even the beard. You don't have to have a beard. It's not legalism. I'm not saying
Right.
a beard if you don't have one, but even the beard was recognized as a secondary male characteristic, and it never says thou shalt have a beard. It skips right over that step. Leviticus 19. It skips right over the step if you will have a beard and just says this is how you're going to cut it.
I think the big differentiator that we need. Well, first of all, I just want to agree with what you're saying. The Bible has a lot of descriptors of masculinity, but it doesn't prescribe masculinity very much. Why? Because it wasn't needed. Everybody knew. Only in our modern Western bubble do we have the luxury of getting confused on all these things, right? But the other piece of it, I think, too, is there's a difference between the masculinity that the Bible exemplifies versus cultural manly things.
Yes.
Like the cultural manly things, like in our culture, it's muscles, and I think that's been in almost every culture ever, has been muscles and strength, but like physical strength. But in our culture, it's stuff like beards and tattoos and clean fades on the side of your head, and trucks and guns and things of these nature. Like certain types of music is more manly, right? But those are not necessarily masculine. Masculine is something that's going to be sort of timeless. That's more of a behavior, more of it's masculinity is that ability to suck it up that
Yes.
you're talking about with Aaron. You don't need a beard for that. You don't need to be 6'5" for that. You don't need to be jacked or bench press 315 pounds for that. You need fortitude, stoic control of emotion, all those things the APA said we need to get rid of, right?
That I would
Yeah.
say, and I've really been kind of drilling down this lately, so it's a good topic to get on. Some of the stuff I've been writing lately, I've just said it comes down to what you're saying. It comes down to what makes a man objectively masculine. Comes under two categories: physical and emotional, and both of them have to do with strength and resilience, I guess you'd say,
Mm.
right? Toughness, right?
Mhm.
So what's more important there is emotional strength, stoic command of emotions, control versus physical. Both are part of that, right? But are muscles in and of themselves objectively masculine? Yes. But where it gets cultural, to your point, where it gets cultural is a bodybuilder, a guy that's all roided up, is he more masculine than just a fit guy? No, not no. I would say no. And I don't.
Agreed.
Friends, I've been a gym rat all my life. I have friends that are bodybuilders. But okay, you're shaving your body and putting on a little thing and getting up and right, and you're tanning and you're oiling. There's certain aspects of the good. So if you're really going to go extreme on that, the more masculine version of the strong man is the guy that has a hairy back and has a little bit of a gut because he doesn't care what he looks like, but he can deadlift a Volkswagen. Right. I'm just being kind of extreme there, but objective masculinity, like you said, it's timeless. It does involve physical strength, but my grandfather would have never thought going to the gym, right? But he could also, at 60 years old, pick up a bale of hay, which is not light, and chuck it into the hayloft that's 12 feet up, right? So he didn't have to go to the gym. And you would have looked at my grandfather and thought, well, he's a fit man, but he's not like a V taper, right? So that's kind of the thing I'm going down in my notes right now, trying to make a list of here's the objective traits, and here's where, kind of like what you're saying with muscles, here's where we go subjective. This is objective, here's the list, this part's subjective. Like, and the nice fade, well, that's a cultural thing, right? That's not necessarily an objective thing.
It's manly versus masculine. That's the way I do it. I see what you're saying. You're just calling it objective versus subjective. Yeah, and that's a great way to say it too. It's like subjective masculinity, it might be mullets and chest hair and hair bands and screaming and all these kinds of things. And then it might be mustaches and sebum and you know those kind of cultures. Another give it a few decades, it'll change, right? And isn't it interesting how the guys who are chasing those changing parts of masculinity, they're probably the ones who are lacking on the objective side, right? That's
Yeah.
why when we see a guy with a jacked up truck, we're saying, oh, he's compensating for something, right? Typically, the guys, that's just a meme, of course, it doesn't mean anything, but the meaning behind it is the more we're chasing those ever changing subjective masculinity, manliness standards, the more it means that we're probably lacking on the objective side, right?
Yeah, I would say without maybe back up a little bit and don't be too specific, but look at it in terms of is this person trying too hard? Or me as an individual, am I trying too hard? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be a jacked up truck. It is that really what I really want?
Right.
This will sound like a side note, but it's related. I've noted a number of women in my family, older women, aunts and whatever. They're not feminists. They're old school country farm girls, all this. But some of them just don't like men. I mean, they like me and get on. But you'll come across this in life. It doesn't mean they're feminists. It doesn't mean they hate men, actually hate men. But some women just naturally think men are silly. So I've ridden bulls in the rodeo. I've raced motorcycles. I joined the Marine Corps. I used to box. All these overtly masculine things. Do you have to do all that to be masculine? No. But those are things that are just guys typically want to do, right? The women, not all, some of the women in my life look at that Ray wanted to go join the Marine Corps or Ray was racing motorcycles, and they just shake their head and that's silly. And so the point I'm getting at is if I'm racing motorcycles or riding bulls, not something I necessarily tell guys to do. I did get stepped on. It wasn't great. But if you don't ride the bull, if you don't want to ride the bull, don't race the motorcycles if you don't want to race. That's not technically what makes you a man, right? So if you're looking at somebody else, a lifter truck or whatever, and you're thinking, well, to be more productive and how to think about that is look at oneself. Am I doing what I'm doing because that's what I want to do, right? And if what you want to do isn't masculine at all, maybe it's whatever. I went to art school. I've published articles. I'm writing a book now. I used to do freelance illustration. The fact that I even read a lot, I have thousands of books. I've had a lot of very masculine male friends in church that didn't read for pleasure. They had no concept of art, none of these things, right? And the fact that I own thousands of books to them seems a little odd. Not that they would ever say anything to me about it, but there's one guy. He was another minister. He's a pastor in a church now, actually. He found out after knowing me for a year that I was actually making money on the side as a freelance artist, and he thought, "What?" And to him, that wasn't masculine, right? So I'm just making the point that there's a lot of things that people get kind of weird in their head. That's masculine or it's not masculine. So that gets back to the list of this is objectively masculine. You don't have to be the strongest guy in the gym, but you need to be relatively strong. You need to be somewhat physically sound, right? Don't be a wimp. You should be able to kind of take care of yourself, right? Is art not masculine? Whatever. That's neither here nor there. Is a lifted truck masculine? Whatever. Do you have to ride the bull? Do you have to race the motor? You don't have to do any of that. So taking stock of ourselves is, what do I feel like doing? And if I feel like racing motorcycles or buying a sports car or doing something that I know my Aunt Esther is going to roll her eyes at because men are silly, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right. Right.
I don't care what Aunt Esther thinks.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for joining us, Ray. I mean, fantastic conversation. I knew we would have zero trouble kicking off into interesting topics. Any closing thoughts, questions?
Don't throw out information. I know Jordan Peterson has said, and I'm not even a huge Peterson fan. I like Peterson, but anyway, always listen to people as if they have something you can learn from them, right? Something like that.
Right.
And so when somebody comes across, and there's a lot of red pill stuff out there, and I know a lot of people that call themselves red pill. They're trash, whatever, right? But always pay attention to what men are saying, because there's usually something you can take away from that. So you can go extreme, like with Fresh and Fit or Andrew Tate or somebody. If you really break down a lot of what they're saying, they have some good stuff in there, to be honest, right? I don't care about a Lamborghini, and I don't care about, the details. I don't care. But a man that will put himself first and his focus, that really is very good advice, right? And that does fit the whole masculine frame idea. And that really is Christian. Look at King David. King David was in his masculine frame. King David was first and foremost his own focus, right? And so when men, and this is just the way I'm going to say it, but when men are of a mindset to see themselves as men first and foremost, I am a tough man. I am a masculine man. I'm not going to pose. I'm not going to compensate. I'm going to follow my goals. I'm going to stick to my focus. And if a woman will complement my life, great.
Yeah.
But I'm going to alter this path I'm on to make this woman happy. She's going to fit the plan, or she's not going to be part of the plan, right?
Yep. Simple.
And I think all of that falls under the umbrella of masculine frame, which is, I don't even care so much about the red pill thing, but I just know the red pill people talk about that a lot, and it causes some division in how people think of things. But there's a lot of value in the idea of masculine frame and understanding that this is how we're shaping our lives up, and this is the path I'm on. And if I have to alter this to make the woman fit into it, you're doing something wrong.
Exactly. It's good. Something Alex Hormozy says about coaching that I really resonate with is that coaching condenses timelines. Whenever you invest your money into a coach, it can condense time. You can literally buy time with coaching, because a lot of you listening to this, by the grace of God, hopefully, maybe one day, will apply a lot of the lessons that I go over in my content. Some of you never will, though. And those of you that do, it will take an indefinite amount of time to happen. I'm just not sure how long it'll take, right? For me, the coaches that I have invested in have helped me learn and apply lessons over a shorter time duration, thus extending my livable life in a sense. It's almost like if you could live the same amount of years, but you had to sleep less, you would be able to live more. It's a similar concept. Coaching truly helps you condense timelines and be very efficient, thus winning your time back as a mature, whole man. If that is something that you want to do, if you are in a state of crisis or you're just ready to level up and condense some timelines, guys, I love what I do. I believe God has put me doing it for a reason. And I've got testimonies of men who have gone through the program. God has worked and they have pulled through and come out as different human beings. I would love to work with you as well. Lord willing, if it's a good fit, DM me the word coach on Instagram and let's have a chat.